to our second speaker series of 2012. The basis of the speaker series is to introduce new ideas, bringing world-class urban thinkers and practitioners who basically will talk about creative ideas, planning, community, and culture that we believe can serve as a catalyst for Northeast Ohio. The series serves to provide a platform for the exploration of ideas to strengthen the innovation capacity of our region's urban centers, creating new investment and jobs. Historically, cities have been the engines of the U.S. economy, and today they play a greater role in that quest for economic development. The issue of place driving the future of cities versus industry driving cities will be the destination of the future. The series is designed to transform thinking and accelerate the kinds of core investment that will be needed to lead this community well into the future. The work that we're doing in UPA, I see a lot of familiar faces here, is really about the core of the city and how we use our assets to build a competitive city well in the 21st century. It's tough work, tough work, tough work. Presented by University Park Alliance, concepts being offered throughout the speaker series are those that are driving the transformation of the University Park neighborhood, basically 50 blocks around the University of Akron, into one of the region's most exciting emerging urban communities. I often tell people, if you have better ideas and concepts, it's time to let us know, because we believe that the issue of place is going to be very important. That's basically what we're trying to do. So special thanks to series supporting sponsors, the Greater Akron Chamber, the University of Akron, and promotional partners, Western Reserve Public Media, through the show Neotropolis, and the Acronists. We have some special guests I want to recognize tonight. Senator, from Senator Sherrod Brown's office, Max Blackman is here. Max is a constant person in these events. I want to recognize from the Akron City Council, City Council President Marshall Somerville. Linda Omobian is here. Russ Neal is here as well. I don't see Eileen Shapiro from the Summit County, but a couple of board members from UPA is here tonight. Ms. Chambers is up front. I'm sorry, Ms. Gates is up front, and Brett Trier, one of our board members, was scheduled to be here, couldn't make it. So now I'm pleased to introduce the speaker for the evening from Minneapolis, Wendy Holmes, the Senior Vice President of Consulting and Strategic Partnerships for ArtSpace USA, America's leading nonprofit real estate developer and affordable space for artists and arts organizations. Wendy oversees the staff board that identifies new communities and new opportunities for arts-related real estate projects across the country. In this capacity, she has advanced cultural space objectives in more than 150 U.S. communities and played a principal role in identifying sites for art space projects in New York, Memphis, El Paso, Tallahassee, among other cities. She's impressed by Akron. She has a nice tour today. I think we have something good going here, so she'll talk about that as well. University Park is a perfect place in Akron for artists, live, work community, something that we're taking a very serious look at. Wendy is here this evening to present Building a Vibrant Community, Artists, Live Workspace as Redevelopment Catalyst. So join me in welcoming Wendy Holmes.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll step away from the presentation first to make sure that the mic works, and I think it is. Everyone can hear me? And secondly, to see if you like my new fashion statement. They said, we forgot to tell you that you needed to wear clothes that have a waistband. Well, here you go. So if I end up bending over by the end of the presentation, you'll know why. I'm honored to be here. I've only been to Akron one time in my life, and that was many years ago. But I've been to many communities in Ohio. So I have a sense of your state. And I have learned a great deal today in a very short period of time through the great tour that I had from Beth Boggins at the University Parks Alliance. So because I'm going to be talking about the importance of artists in helping create and retain vibrant communities, I want to know who I'm speaking to. So how many of you are artists? Either full-time or part-time, doesn't matter. Fantastic. All right. And how many of you are visual artists? Do we have any performing artists? Okay, wonderful. I realize there's many different kinds of artists, and I'm not going to have you all raise your hands and tell me, but it's good to know that there are artists in the audience as well. So the video that I was showing earlier was a video of our artists for our Fort Lauderdale project. Many of them are from Haiti, and they were doing a benefit for a Haitian organization, and that was a video from that event. So that wasn't just something from a stock off of Google. It was an actual artist space in Fort Lauderdale, one that the Knight Foundation helped to support. So I'll be showing you pictures of that in a little bit. So ArtSpace is a national nonprofit developer, owner, and manager of space for artists. And how we like to think about ourselves is that through artists, we help transform communities. This is a quick look at our work across the country, and what's significant isn't the number of dots, but what is significant is the number of cities who are thinking about this, who are thinking about why artists contribute something special to a community and how they can create and preserve sustainable space for artists. You can see that we've done a lot of consulting, and we're working on a project in Hamilton, Ohio, and a lot in the Northeast region as well, and in the Midwest. But this is just a look at how many communities across the country are thinking about this, and this is really only a fraction of them. So getting down to the basics, so you know who ArtSpace is, we were established in 1979 by the city of Minneapolis because there were a lot of artists in the warehouse district of Minneapolis, and those people kept getting forced out because they would create a sense of place that other people found desirable, and their rents would go up, and then they would get kicked out. And we call that the Soho effect, and it happens in many communities across the country. I'm sure I hear murmurs out there as if this is a familiar concept. So we were established as a nonprofit real estate developer in the mid to late 80s so that we could actually create these spaces to be affordable and preserve that affordability over time so that artists would not become victims of their own success. So that is how we started, because the warehouse district of Minneapolis was losing its creative edge. The city recognized that. They started a nonprofit. Little did they know we'd do our first project in St. Paul. So we've completed 30 projects across the country. We've consulted in nearly 150 over the last 5 to 10 years. We have 3 projects under construction in Illinois and in Minnesota, 4 that recently opened in Minnesota, California, Washington, D.C., and Iowa, 13 other projects in pre-development. We own and operate about 1,000 affordable live-work units of space for artists and about 1 million square feet of non-residential space that makes up creative businesses, nonprofit arts organizations, working studio spaces, gallery spaces, etc. And in almost all cases, they're paying well below market rate. And that is usually the only way it works for working artists. So when I talk about who we are and what we do, I talk about our programs. And our programs are about creating space and sustaining that space to be affordable. It's about managing that space for artists, and it's about consulting with other communities and arts agencies and cities and nonprofit organizations to help them figure out how to do this as well. We can't be in every city and every state. We want to teach others the lessons that we've learned along the way and continue to learn from other communities as we move along in our learning process as well. So you know all of these things, right? That artists help cities retain their creative and cultural edge. They help build safer and more attractive neighborhoods, and that artist spaces and the presence of artists act as a catalyst for economic development. Those are all things that I think pretty much people know about. But I think what's more interesting than that, more interesting than the economic piece or the community development piece, is more about why artists are being talked about more today than ever before. And your own Knight Foundation, and you're lucky to be a Knight community, I recognize that you know that, did a study called The Soul of the Community. Are you familiar with that study? It was a 3-year research study where they talked to, I don't know, tens of thousands of people across the country about why they moved to a place. And it wasn't about jobs and education. That really surprised them. It was about social interaction, that people move to a place because there are opportunities for social engagement and openness and aesthetics were more important than jobs and education, even though those things are important too, but that's not what's driving people to cities. That may have been 20 years ago, but it's not today. And this is a picture of an interactive kiosk in Copenhagen. And just along the way, I'll show you some surprise elements in cities that I've seen or others have seen that I think are interesting ways for people to socially interact with using technology. So you might recognize me in that photo. Well, my family ran into this kiosk/camera in Chicago, and we got to choose any headline that we wanted, so we thought, great, royal family visits Chicago. So having artists and creative people in a community also helps make a place more vibrant and safe and dynamic and innovative and relevant, and I could go on and on with the adjectives. But one of the ones that I like the most, that I recently discovered myself, was in Chicago and in New York, and that's that element of surprise. Think about when you're visiting a museum, and you go into the museum and you expect there to be new things to look at, to interact with, to experience. If you went back to that same museum and nothing ever changed, you wouldn't go back. I think the same applies to cities. You've got to have that element of surprise, that element of things changing and being dynamic for people to want to be there and to stay there. So there's no doubt that artists' spaces can be catalytic projects, and there are other kinds of projects that can be catalytic as well. But I think it's good for you to think about that. And I know that the University Park Alliance is thinking about where can they have projects that can be catalytic in various areas within their development footprint. And when I think about that, I think of anchor developments that incorporate multiple uses and cultures and dimensions and include the arts and technology. And these are two interesting examples of sort of catalytic events or happenings or projects in cities. In New Orleans, has anyone seen this? It's a giant classroom blackboard that covers about 100 square feet of space on a corner as you walk down the street. And people are writing on the blackboard. They're drawing on the blackboard. It's a place, it's a way to express yourself. It's a way to discover things. It's a way to meet people. And then I just found this today, and this lower picture is by a couple of Dutch artists who have done some creative painting in areas in cities in Brazil. And then I realized that you have something very similar to that with the artist neighborhood. Beth, help me out. What is the name of the artist? The name of the artist who's done the colorful paintings on the outside of the... Thank you, thank you. Exactly. So one of the things that we've done is to have a third-party researcher look at the impact of the projects that we've done in 4 different markets. So she looked at the impact of artist spaces and the impact on individual artists themselves. And the things that she found were that these projects that contained at least 40 units of artist space and other kinds of commercial space for the arts, had a profound impact on property values, increased property taxes, increases in population, and interestingly, this is something we were really surprised about because we had a lot of anecdotal information. We thought artists would be able to make more income as a result of being in affordable space. What we found is that artists made about the same or slightly less income, but it was more from art and less from other sources. And that may not surprise those of you who are artists, but it helped people not have to hold down 2 or 3 other jobs, in other words. So space is precious to artists, and I don't know if everyone understands that. So engaging marginalized, under-resourced artists and arts organizations, they are agents of community transformation. And our value, ArtSpace's value that we bring to that is that we want artists, I am an artist myself, to always be able to be a part of a community and not just being used for a particular development goal. So some of the things that the research pointed out was how developing a next generation of local leaders is important and often comes out of the arts community. Anchoring creative partners is another piece of arts-driven community transformation. Cultivating a sense of place, creating more livable communities, and generating wealth without displacement. A lot of people are concerned when artists move into a neighborhood because they do generally increase property values, that others will be displaced. And that is something that when you all are thinking about where to create artist space, you need to think about how you can do that in a thoughtful way that doesn't displace other residents in the community. It's not an easy thing, but it can be accomplished. So now I'm going to go back to, I was talking at the theoretical level, and now I'm going to come back to the ground here and show you some examples of our work and talk to you about how these projects worked within the neighborhood of the city, within the context of the city and the neighborhood. These are 2 projects that we completed in 1989 and 1993, and there are 118 live-work units for artists and about 50,000 square feet of commercial space for nonprofit arts organizations and creative businesses. And these 2 buildings were really the first to be redeveloped in downtown St. Paul. Several developers had gone out of business trying to make the one in the foreground work. The roof was caving in. It was a very difficult to develop a building. And now, today, we've refinanced both of these buildings so that the artists can continue to be there for another 50 years and have it be affordable. Across the street from these buildings were empty lots. Now, today, it's a farmer's market. Light rail is coming in. Totally changed in that 20 years. Creative businesses, they play a really important role within the context of what we do and what communities ask us to do. So in a project in Council Bluffs, Iowa, we did the white building in the foreground is all commercial space, and the building in the background is 39 or 36 units of live workspace. And then there's a playground in the front as well, because when we'd done our research ahead of time, we knew that a lot of artists who wanted space in the community had families. And so we created a playground for those families as well. I think if those of you who aren't artists may not realize that artists aren't always solitary souls who don't interact with the rest of the world. They're very communal. Artists come in all flavors, but I think a lot of people are surprised when you say, really, artists have families? Well, of course they have families. So I want to show you a news clip from Council Bluffs, Iowa, from when that project opened last year. There may be a little ad at the beginning sometimes. I can't avoid it. And maybe it won't happen at all. That's what? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, did you really? And Omaha is right across the river. Yeah, exactly. Well, the gentleman in the front was saying, and Omaha is where the casinos are, and indeed a foundation that was set up through casino revenues helped to provide support for the project that we did there. I think it's not going to work. I'll try again at the end maybe and see if it will work. We'll go back. Oh, no. Sorry about that. We'll try it again at the end. These artists are all waving from our Santa Cruz project. We're told that every artist is in there, even though some may have been photoshopped in. And this is an old tannery site in Santa Cruz, California. Now, you can imagine the environmental conditions of a tannery site, right? So it was very, very difficult to develop. The tannery buildings were vacant for about 20 years. And the county put $6 million worth of environmental remediation into this site before we started working on this project. And what was happening in Santa Cruz is that the average home at the time that we were working on this project sold for $760,000. And that was for a tiny little shack. And so many artists were living on the beach, living on the streets, living elsewhere. And they really couldn't afford any longer to be in Santa Cruz unless they were grandfathered in through a relative. So this was really important for the city and the county to have some stable, affordable space for artists to live and work. So this was a redevelopment partnership with the redevelopment agency, and they actually came to ArtSpace and said, can you work with us and figure out a solution for this site? So we created 100 units of new construction, live workspace for artists. When they applied for the spaces, we had people lined up for 2 days prior to filling out their applications for the space. We had a giant soup kettle, all kinds of water and food out on the sidewalk because people were so desperate for space. They were there 2 days ahead of time camping out. So immediately we had over 400 artists on a waiting list. This is the condition of some of the tannery buildings that we were able to preserve before we started the development. And then this is a digital media and creative arts center that includes space for the ballet, some high-tech nonprofits that are using the studio space. It's beautiful space in these old tannery buildings. So another solution to a neighborhood challenge, a lot of times we're working in communities where artist space can be a solution to a neighborhood challenge. And this was a very difficult block in Minneapolis. There had been a lot of crime in this area. And the city was very interested in working with this new nonprofit in creating a space for them to teach fire arts. So anything that has a spark or a flame, so jewelry art, glass schlubbing, metal work, etc., is taught out of this center. But prior to this being a center, it was an auto repair shop. Prior to that, it was a movie theater. So it's sort of an ABA theme. If any of you know symphonies, it's coming back to life as an art center. And it's made a tremendous impact on the neighborhood. Now across the street is a gallery space. Right next door, there's a coffee shop. This was completed in 2010, and already we can see visible signs of change. So in your own backyard in Ohio, we are working on a Main Street project in the main street of Hamilton, Ohio, where we're taking an old department store and converting that into artist space. And we worked with the Fitz Center for the Arts. Are any of you familiar with that in Hamilton? Fitton Center for the Arts in Hamilton. And they were our local partner as well as the city of Hamilton. So in Buffalo, New York, This project started auspiciously because one of Senator Clinton's staff members was sitting in an audience like this and came up to us afterwards and said, I really think the senator needs to do something for the arts, and something big and something visible and something outside of New York City, and this is it. And we all went, okay. And so she wrote an editorial in the Buffalo newspaper. And in the editorial, she told the mayor that he needed to call Art Space. So we got a call from the mayor, then Mayor Tony Masiello from Buffalo, and he said, I'd really like you to do something in Buffalo. We've got a lot of empty buildings, particularly on Main Street, but there's many vacant buildings in Buffalo, and we'd like you to take a look at that. We've got a vibrant arts community. So we were thinking in Buffalo we would be doing something relatively small, somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 to 40 units. But the artist survey, the research that we did ahead of time, came back and said, no, Buffalo is a pretty important community in the arts, and you can create 60 to 100 units of live workspace. So we went ahead and restored an old electric car factory in the background, and then did two-story townhomes that are integrated into the neighborhood, which has a lot of single-family homes on the other side. So one side of the building is more of a commercial district, and the other side of the building is more of a neighborhood with single-family homes. So there's a little bit of both. And then in between, there's a community garden. It's really quite lovely what's happened in between those two buildings. And this is another community garden project in our Chicago project. So we like to take the cool things that are happening with artists in one city and help transport that to another city. So Buffalo did it first, and we thought, well, this is cool. Let's inform our artist tenants about how they did this and how they organized themselves, and let's see if other cities and artist communities will pick this up, and this is an example of that. So you're familiar with art crawl activities, and these buildings that we help to develop and manage and own obviously become kind of the epicenters of some of these art crawl scenes. It's a very dynamic way of the public interacting with artists, buying their work, observing their work. This is a 3-level gallery space and performance space in our Fort Lauderdale project, where you saw the video at the beginning. And this is a non-leasable space, so the artists don't lease this space. This is free for them to use as part of the contract for their live workspace. And I'm not even sure, I start these things and don't define live workspace. For those of you who aren't familiar, a live work unit is typically 150 to 200 square feet larger than a typical apartment, so that an artist has enough space to set up whatever it is that they do. And we're not, we don't judge whether a poet needs more or less room than a painter, but there's a lot of different artists in our buildings. This is another example of an artist-run gallery. I'm going to go through these rather quickly. This was a community collaboration where we collaborated with a nonprofit organization called Dance Place in Washington, D.C., in the Brookland neighborhood of Washington, D.C. by Catholic University, if any of you are familiar with that. And in the building that we completed last year, we created a space for the dance center to have an education space. So the dance center is right next door to the right of this building, and they didn't have enough space for community outreach and education, so we created that in the context of our project. So it was a wonderful collaboration with them, and this is the interior of their performance space. These are other examples of that non-leasable community space that we try to build into every project so that every artist community has an outlet for their expression, basically. So you can see that the artists give a lot back to a community. This is a dancer giving a demonstration. I could never figure out why she's not using the dance floor that's in the back, but another collaboration we did was with a county arts council in Everett, Washington, outside of Seattle, the Snohomish Arts Council, and they wanted to create a new arts and education space. And the city wanted us to create Live Workspace. And we said, why don't we put these two projects together? So we worked simultaneously and created a new building in downtown Everett where they could have their education space. This is their hot shop and their gallery space and their event space, and then we would have Live Work above that. So how does art give back? Well, we've talked about that in very broad terms, and now I'm going to get really specific. And these are real pictures from our projects. Lively streets with nonprofit arts organizations, a pizzeria, monthly art walks. You see in both of these examples, one is in Seattle and one is in Chicago. And it makes for safer, more active streets. Artists also really care about their neighborhoods, so you can see that the aesthetics also change as a result of artists being in a place. This is an example of a community dance class. So the other great thing about so many artists is that they want to engage the neighborhood. They want to engage others and bring others in. And you want to look for those types of artists who are willing to do that, particularly if you're trying to achieve other community development objectives. So shared and dedicated galleries and working studio spaces so that there's a diversity of experiences. I love this one. This is two women have a design studio, and they thought, well, let's have a coffee shop and make a little bit of money. So they have about 12 feet of space in the front of their design shop where they sell coffee and tea and little munchies, and in the back they have their design studio. And the whole space is about 2,000 square feet, possibly even less than that. But they have about 12 feet in the front. That's their coffee shop. So very low overhead, and these women are making a go of it. Arts instruction and art outreach to young people, that's another really important value that artists can bring. Our Fort Lauderdale artists, I'm featuring them a lot today. I think I want to be in warmer climate perhaps, although you were pretty good today, so thank you, is a music camp. So some of the resident artists in our Fort Lauderdale project organized this music camp for kids in the neighborhood. Now we're working on a new project in Loveland, Colorado, which is about 45 minutes north of Denver. And we're renovating this old feed and grain building, and then we're going next to it, we're going to put 39 units of Live Workspace. Well, the arts are already happening in this space just by the virtue of the fact that people are starting to talk about it as artist space. A group of artists decided to put a light installation together on the building, in the building, etc., to draw attention to this future project. Now, obviously, we're not the only ones creating and managing space for the arts. I wanted to show you a couple of other really interesting examples from other places. And do any of you know Project Row House in Houston? Really dynamic gentleman by the name of Rick Lowe. Worked with the neighborhood and took what they call shotgun shacks that had been abandoned. The windows had been broken, they were all dilapidated, and transformed them into space for entrepreneurial, new arts-related nonprofit organizations. And then he created an infrastructure to teach them how to create a business plan and work with the neighborhood on projects specifically for the neighbors' kids. And I just think this is a great way, another way to look at community development and how arts can be an important component of that. Do any of you know the Torpedo Factory in Alexandria? I'm really going from one extreme to the other here, right? So this is an old torpedo factory that's been transformed into an artist co-op space where the artists are asked to work and have their studios open for a certain number of hours every week in exchange for low-cost rent in the building. So this is an interior shot of that. Now, some artists say to me, oh, it's an artist zoo, I really don't like that. And others say, oh, it's fabulous. So I get a lot of reactions from artists about this space. Some like it, some don't. this is an example of an artist in residency space in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was talking to Eric about this earlier. A friend of mine runs this. Her name is Suzanne Fletcher, and they took the exterior of this church, gutted it, and created space for an artist in residency program. So artists apply to have a residency for a 6 to 8 month period of time from all over the world. And then they have a community service component where they give back to the local neighborhood where this project is. But it's just gorgeous. So a lot of people ask, well, it's great that you talk about artists, but what does that really mean? And I really like what we learned from the Ojibwe artists in our project in Duluth, Minnesota, because they said, Wendy, we don't have a word for art in our language because it's so much a part of everyday life. And so I hesitate to say what art should be defined for your community, but here are some of the ways in which art can be defined. It's more than just visual art and performing art broadly defined. It's also things like healing arts, or people who are in the film industry, or people who are ushers at the theater, costume designers, things that you may not traditionally think of as an art form. So a lot of people also ask us, and I won't dwell on this because it's slightly off topic, but how do you find the artists, and what's the interview process for having them be a part of one of your projects? And the only reason I pass this on to you, it's not so you do it exactly like this, but that I think it's good to think about finding artists who have a real commitment and a passion for an art form, who have a desire to give back to the community and have a portfolio of work to show for what they do. So that you know that it's not someone who's just brought a wet canvas in to say, oh, I'm an artist too. Or perhaps singing in the Sunday choir, once a month. It's really talking about artists who are doing art for a living, even if they're not making the majority of their income from their art, which very few artists make 100% of their income from their art. So in closing, I'm going to see if that Council Bluffs video will work, and then I have a couple of quotes I want to share.
If you haven't been to downtown Council Bluffs lately, what you find might surprise you. A budding art community and creative business ventures. City leaders hope will draw a new kind of crowd.
When I caught wind of this, I was very excited.
Artist Josh Powell always called Council Bluffs home, even before it attracted condos he calls perfect.
There's nothing like this available for artists.
The Harvester Art Space Lofts have living space, have studio, meant to provide affordable options for artists and revitalize the south edge of downtown.
We're trying to do some things a little bit different, transform the community, bring young people in.
Mayor Tom Hanifin says the city wants more people to come to Council Bluffs, not just to live, but to hang out.
Hello, how are you doing tonight?
And that's what the owners of Dixie Quicks are banking on. The popular Omaha restaurant moved to Council Bluffs a couple weeks ago.
I think this is starting to bloom and there's a renaissance that is occurring here.
Rob Gilmer says he and his partner decided to reopen across the river to provide an anchor restaurant of sorts to the Bluffs community.
There's a whole population over here, a whole community over here that have spent so much of their monies, and time in Omaha, and now it's like, hey, now you can, do a lot more things in your hometown.
And business is good.
Thanks for coming down in our second week.
The Harvester Art Space Lofts came to Council Bluffs with help from the Iowa West Foundation. The nonprofit gave $1.4 million to the revitalization of the downtown area. Still ahead to
just to close, and then we'll open it up for questions because I'd really love to hear from you. I found a great quote in Urban Land Institute magazine, and there's often inspiration there. And for those of us who are in the community development business of trying to create projects that contribute back to a community, I think we need to move away from a strictly financial explanation of cap rates and returns on investment, as important as they are. We are here to design compelling places and spaces. When we do this well, the financial returns can be stellar. So I'll leave you with that.
That's the last thing. It's no small thing that that Art Space is agreed to join us and take a closer look at our community. We do have some time for questions and answers, either of Wendy or of Dr. Johnson about UPA's plans for the future of supporting the arts in University Park. We have 2 microphones moving around. Even though it may feel that you don't need to use the microphone in the room, we are videotaping, so we ask you to just raise your hand if you have a question and wait for the microphone to come to you. Questions?
Do you have any possible sites to cut in this area?
Oh, is this? Yeah, we have a couple of options. We just hadn't explored those options in details. We do have some flexibility, but there is a site that we could explore this possibility on.
It's a quiet group.
Could you talk a little bit about the characteristics of either the buildings or the neighborhoods that these types of projects work well in?
Sure. There's certainly not one model for that. And at the beginning of our work, we did a lot of historic preservation, but have found that over time, there's a lot of vacant parcels and brownfield sites and other things like that that can be wonderful places to create space for artists, just because those are more available properties sometimes within a community. But we really work to follow the comprehensive plan of a city or a community, because it is whatever you think is most important in terms of where to create these kinds of space that we want to follow. So a lot of times, that having been said, a lot of times we're in warehouse districts, classic warehouse districts on the edge of downtowns. Sometimes we're creating space in neighborhoods, such as the large footprint neighborhood that the University Park Alliance oversees. Sometimes we're working on, we haven't done any suburban kinds of things yet. I haven't found that there's a big draw for that, particularly among artists. But also the suburbs, I don't know if they're thinking about that yet. But I would say that infill sites in neighborhoods and then warehouse districts are the most common. Is that the kind of thing you meant?
How would you go about
Well, I would ask you. The question is, how would I go about getting people interested in this project? You know, your answer is probably as good as mine. What's your answer?
and talk about what possibilities are in this development.
Yes, go ahead.
One of the things I'd like to say is artists have already attempted to do that and have done so successfully with the first Saturday Art Walk that's held down at the north side of the High Street area. And that was another thing, that the liquor space idea is valuable, even though our rental area isn't really that expensive already. But the gentrification aspect is always like, you know, the special. But as far as exhibition spaces, have you looked down in the North Side District for exhibition and living workspaces that exist down there? That's a question directed towards you.
Oh, for me?
Yeah, down in the north side area.
Actually, no. It's actually out of the footprint of University Park.
That's out of the footprint?
Yeah, that's out of the footprint, so no, we haven't.
Oh, okay, because why I was curious about that is the north side area has actually got 5 galleries and studios, and it's also connected with the art walk through some art space. So, I mean, it's already got an art walk. What we're trying to find is ways to attract even more people to come in and purchase art, because that is the one issue that artists have a hard time with. We're not making all art. We don't have available gallery space. There's not many galleries for us to exhibit in around here. And that's what we need.
And that's one of the things that we do when we come into a new community is have focus groups with, or conversations, if you will. You don't have to call them fancy focus groups, but conversations with individual artists and arts organizations to find out what people need and want in terms of space in the community. And then we double back and do a more scientific survey of artist space needs, because in order to get these things funded and financed, the bankers and the financing institutions need to understand that there's a demand, and that's a foreign market to most finance people. No offense to anyone in this room, but that is usually the case. So finding out what artists need and want in a quantitative kind of way is really super important in a new community.
I mean, I'd like to hear from the other visual artists in the room. I mean, I think we need more gallery space primarily because I don't have, I mean, there's very few galleries in that. We have no exhibit truly except art fairs, but we need more interior art rooms.
Other questions?
Hi, I'm Tony Trophy.
Hi, Tony.
And had a great opportunity to meet you today. And rather than posing a question, I'm affirming what she's talking about. And just remind everyone that A is for Akron and A is for art. And art is really the driver as we become enthused about our great place that we live in. We take these creative concepts and we translate them into action. So I want to applaud my friend Dr. Johnson here for bringing in this type of speaking engagement so that we can continue this dialogue. So rather than continuing a dialogue, I want to tell you about the creative place that's being made right at the crossroads of North and Howard. I call it NoHo because it's a rejuvenation of a place that is going to be for our artist friends. Now, it's live work, so when you talk about a space, it has to function that you can live in, but it also has to have a place that you can work in and create this art. And it's right on the towpath trail. And so there is a natural draw for a creative, imaginative, and a recreative experience that really makes sense to bring people to this place to celebrate the arts. So we are expanding the footprint, not necessarily of UPA, but an artistic community that becomes pervasive as far as bringing a creative class where people have a choice to move wherever they want to. They want to go to these stimulating environments that they can find this happy experience. So I'm celebrating the fact that you're here and that you're here and that it's telling me that it's a good thing that I'm here too.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony. That's great. Other questions or comments?
Oh, I was just thinking, like, there's all these separate communities I'm hearing about with the arts, and I know like a lot of things have been developed already with arts in Akron. But I think what's really inviting about this project is that it's creating a together community instead of these separate entities all around the city. And this will be like a big collaborative setting where you don't have to like kind of trolley around, like for the art walk, like you have to like trolley everywhere, and like so all these like separate things in the city. So everything seems like it'll be coming together more one community. And I think that's really nice, yeah, really attractive.
Well, that's what we were just talking about in a meeting prior to this, about making Akron more of a cultural center and having the whole city just be Akron, or the city. You know, pardon?
Talk in the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was about making Akron a cultural center, being able to market Akron as a cultural center. That I know it's just down there right now, but you know, but then it extends up to the high street, and then it extends over to the Summit Art Space. But to keep it growing all around, you just make the whole entire city of Akron art community where we take over. Not in a negative way, but in a more positive, creative, cultural, and also helping us make a living.
There you go. All right, we've got a question over here, or comment.
Just had a question. So I recognize that you've been doing work, all the way back, the one story about, I believe, St. Paul in 1990 and 93. Can you just share a little bit about what the maturation of these types of communities look like?
Yes.
Looks like? So,
yes.
As you end up moving away from the development side and let the community take over, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a good question.
I love that question because a lot happens organically. At the beginning, when these artist communities come together, we try to help them have some structure of how they can be organized by using other artist communities as examples. But regardless of that, they all take on their own being over time, and some have more robust social media networks. Some have more robust gallery and performing arts kinds of activities. Every one is slightly different. There is one of the buildings in St. Paul, or both of the buildings actually, those communities of artists, they only want to have art crawls twice a year because they experimented and they had them monthly and people weren't buying as much art. And so they learned over time that you had to build up a little bit of demand, and people actually came and bought if you only had it twice a year versus every month. Well, that was new information to us, and that was something and that might not be true in Seattle. That was true in St. Paul. It might not be true in Seattle, but all of these artists really take on a life of their own, and they also have their own identity. So if you go onto our website, then you can see all the sub-websites and see all the different activities. So it's really great to see that. And then if there's problems, if there's issues with the physical space or the neighbors or things like that, we broker those conversations with a local property management company. A lot of times, though, over time, we've learned that it's good to have a resident artist who has both a property management function and is an artist in the building as well. And that helps to sort of guide the conversation, and also it's someone who can relate to the artist but understands the business side as well. Yeah. And I like the idea of having arts, of course, sprinkled throughout your community, and not just having one big place for it, which is great also, but having it sprinkled throughout is healthy. Yeah.
I have a question about funding. Actually, two questions about funding. How's art space funded? And then what are some examples of how projects you develop around the country get funded?
So I usually show that slide, but because the topic was a little bit different, I didn't show that slide this time. So typically the financing for our projects is upside down from a for-profit developers model, and they are public-private partnerships where in a mixed-use setting with live workspace and commercial space on the ground floor, we look for anywhere between 40 and 60% of the total equity to come from low-income housing tax credits. So that's for people who are at or below 60% of area median income, which is determined by the county. I don't know what that is for Summit County, but someone in this room probably knows what that is. And then we couple that with home funds, which is a federal program, sometimes community development block grants, sometimes tax increment financing. There are housing trust funds in some states that we also use for that purpose. And then the gap typically comes from private sector philanthropy, particularly foundations who are interested in the arts component. So the most of the equity comes from housing resources, and then the gap to fill out the entire development and pay for the commercial component of the space comes from private sector philanthropy. And then, of course, a first mortgage, but the mortgage has to be very low because we can't assume a lot of debt on these projects because the margins are so very, very, very thin. That's a quick 101. But there are variations with every project and every community.
Going back to the question of the evolution or maturation of the areas we come into, in the area of the intersection of business and manufacturing and art, can you give an example? You showed the one from Santa Cruz where they have the media folks in there. We're folks that build things here.
Right.
How can you vision? Can you give us an example of how we can build on the homes?
Okay, say the first part of your question again.
The intersection of business or manufacturing and arts and how they might evolve in these spaces.
Yeah. Well, certainly we've taken a lot of industrial buildings and converted them over for artists, but there's a interesting example in Loveland, Colorado, where there's a lot of foundries there that were built for industry that have now been converted to foundries for the arts. And so one of those foundries is actually being incorporated into the larger development, which is a very, that was the community's idea. It wasn't our idea, but I thought that was a very interesting one. I can't think of a specific collaboration that we've ever done with industry, but I think it's an interesting thing to think about. How do you see that playing out, for example?
Such as prototyping, creating new products,
Mm-hmm.
The materials, the engineers and technology might not have to find arts to create these human factors.
Mm-hmm. I like that. And artists are really their own cottage industries. So they employ themselves and they often employ others as well. So when you think about making the case for why creative people are important in your community, they are job creators as well. Yes?
This is kind of directed towards you, Doctor. On the corner of Market Street, I think it's Forge over there, where the old McIntyre
Chevy site?
Yes. Is this related to these projects here? Because I noticed they do mostly refurbishments of existing sites, and that is it's an empty lot now. So if you could shine a little light on if they are related and exactly what the University Park project plans to do with that.
It's related in the sense of the overall core city master plan. So when you look at the 4 districts in the plan, that area is defined as what we call the crossroads district. So will we do live work space there? No, we won't. That's not part of the plan over there. Office space, some traditional potential educational uses, research, combination. Look for something like that to happen at that site.
What are the next steps within the development plan? The next couple of steps that are laid out already for an artist space? And then for our guest speaker, from what you've seen here locally today, what are some must-dos that we as a community must do?
Oh, that's a good one. Do you want to go first?
Well, I'll say first and foremost, I think that we need, I'm going to almost call it an artist colony, for the lack of a better word. Mm-hmm. And I think we need that in Akron from the perspective of getting us on the map in this sort of context. So when you look at the various cities, we look at those dots across the map, I think that we have to we have to get ourselves on that map. So I think that's point number one, that we need to do that so we can enter the stream of this conversation about artist-type communities, and Akron needs to be in that fold. And I think, secondly, I think sort of an early conversation with the artist community, I think, should begin to start to happen. I think that's where we begin to figure out what those needs are and just really touch base with the artist community first and foremost. And do we have site locations? Absolutely. Is it something we can work with? Absolutely. But the model she's talking about, when she read that piece from ULI, which I'm one of the board members on the Inner City Council with ULI, that model is what we're talking about. Well, I'm not going to say but the perspective of UPA trying to create something that the private sector can't, that's really the focus of what we're doing. Private sector's not going to do this. There's not a 12% return. There's not a 16% return. There's no money for you to make it. So we're really trying to deploy that model and really do projects that send a message. We're not about just doing real estate projects. This doesn't, trust me, it does no good for Akron just to do your simple projects. We have to do projects that what we call have meaning and value to them. The creative space she's talking about. That live workspace could be a graphic artist that's got a little place in his or her house that may be working on a contract with the Big Three Auto to design something. May have a contract with Disney Pixar. And these are real life examples. I've actually seen this in motion. So the missing link that we have, we don't have that sort of genesis piece, and we need to figure it out. We talk a lot about bio-innovation and things like that, but when you really start to break it down, it's the place that we really have to focus on. So just in conclusion, I think it really begins with having a conversation with the artist community to figure out, what that need is and how we can structure something around that need. I'm an artist. I'm trying to paint a picture, I'm
a singer, yeah.
So yeah, that's my thoughts.
Well, I would reinforce what Eric said about talking with the artists, finding more about what they are hoping for in your community, getting them engaged. And then the second thing is, I think is very important, is to contact your elected officials. And you have several in this room. Would you raise your hands? There was a city council member here. Yes, thank you for being here. And they are very important conduits for making sure that this kind of thing gets supported in your community.
Well, let me add something else to that. UPA needs, we need additional catalysts, right? And this is not a job just for University Park, where everybody's sitting around waiting for University Park to actually do. We're putting a lot of effort, a lot of sweat, a lot of strategy behind this, but we're going to need other people in this community to start to step up and actually start to fill some of these gaps. I'm not talking about financially. I'm talking about strategically, strategy-wise. We cannot be the only one leading this charge. So the truth is, we hear a lot about, well, we'll see when projects come. We'll wait and see until. But the true test of the work that's being done is the infusion of others that get sort of the vision of what we're trying to do. And there are a couple of examples I'm not going to talk about here, but we need that type of stuff to actually happen. So if it's the artist community saying, look, we need X, Y, Z, all right, let's figure out a way to get it done. So I'm making an appeal more or less to the community in general, to don't have UPA on the ropes trying to figure this thing out by itself. We're serving as a catalyst, and point being, we are trying to do the right thing. That being that, yes, we can build real estate projects. I'm going back to this, but doing projects that help the community. So 5 years from now, we would hope that UPA, will be in a different position where we don't have to serve in that sort of capacity. So let me just run this down to you quickly. It's not rocket science. The feds are down. The state is down. The city's down. Adele's back there. She'll tell you. The governments are facing issues, right? A lot of the partners in town are facing issues. But here we are trying to fill this gap to facilitate development to get this thing over the hump. Otherwise, Akron is a declining Midwestern city. so different than Youngstown, so different than some of the other cities. So I'm just making my appeal. I don't know if it's the right time to do it, but hey, I do it anyway. That but the issue around artists, tell us, don't whisper around us. Call us, send us an email, tell us what is it that you're looking for. How do we connect the dots and help us get it done? So that's just my commentary.
Good, good, thank you. Yes.
Just a quick technical question. When you're doing revitalization projects in a smaller size town,
yes.
Akron's a large city, but we still are a very big small town.
Sure.
Have you ever done a project in a pre-existing apartment complex or a hotel?
Yes. No to, have we done an apartment building? I don't think we've done apartment, no, but we've done 2 hotels. One in Reno, Nevada, which was an old divorce hotel where people could come to get quick divorces. And now it's an artist community. And that's a funny story. They all have interesting lives prior to the artists coming in, right? And then another in, it was actually a hotel that experienced a major fire, and so had been sort of an albatross in the middle of downtown in Waukegan, Illinois, on the lake right outside of Chicago, and no one could figure out what to do with it. And so those are 2 examples. Hotels make great conversion into artist space. Apartment buildings, sometimes. That ceiling height in traditional apartments is pretty low. And we like to create volumes of space that are larger than a typical apartment. Yep. Just because we know that's what artists want and need. Yeah.
I'm in Rockport for the city, and I'm not going to say that we're doing that. I had a question. Somebody asked about the funding and sort of, the start-off process. But once these projects get underway with the public-private finances and foundations and all these great tools that you mentioned, what is the sustainability economically of the projects? Do they continue to need infusions of partnership money?
No, and I knock on wood or whatever this is every time I say this, but so far, 30 times over, we've never had to go back to the community to ask for resources to operate the project. Now, we build in capital and operating reserves, so we do this very carefully, and we look for refinancing opportunities when those exist. So when the tax credits, for example, expire, we refinance with a new infusion of tax credits or whatever the tool is available at that time. So far, it's not been the case, but that means that you have to capitalize these properly from the very beginning and never own a building or a piece of land before you've done the closing. We did that once and we'll never do that again. Yes.
Hi, Max Black from the Senator Sherrod Brown's office, and thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Based on you having been brought here to Akron, that the determination has been made that there is a critical mass of artists in this community for one of these projects to be successful, and that's true. And let me just take a moment to stand up for my dear friends in Youngstown, which is one of the that are going on there in Youngstown. But anyway, wonderful things happening in Akron. But what I wanted to ask you is I think more broadly, and I know our focus here is University Park, but I'm thinking about Cleveland and Canton and yes, Youngstown. What is the critical mass that's required for one of these projects to be successful? I'm assuming that by its very inception, you're going to start to see some kind of consolidation of the artistic community around one of these projects. So I'm sure it grows as the project grows. But what's required? Is there a sort of financial output that you can assess for what these artists are going to be able to produce, or is it sort of cultural capital that you're able to measure in some other way?
We, well, first of all, when we do the market research to find out how many artists are needing space in an area, we look for 3 times as many artists responding positively to that survey as the number of units of space that we would create. And we find that that's a very safe, conservative ratio of number of artists interested to number of spaces that you would safely create. It's not, that ratio has never failed us, so we continue to use it. And most of these projects are oversubscribed from the very beginning because they're designed well and specifically with artist input and their occupation, if you will, although that varies, in mind. Was that what you wanted to know about, or was it more?
It was, yeah, and I appreciate your response. I just wanted to say, by way of conclusion, that certainly speaking on behalf of Senator Brown, and I imagine the same is true of Congresswoman Sutton, Ryan, soon to be Congressman Fudge, who will represent this area, that we'll do all that we can to assist you with the federal revenue streams that you outlined. And I imagine that this is going to take public, private, and foundation support to make it happen. So very happy to support you.
Quick question.
Thank you.
What are you guys seeing in rents? Is it 300, 500, 400, 250?
Oh, what are the rents in our properties? Well, they vary by market. So in Buffalo, the lowest rent is $250. In Seattle, the lowest rent is $700. So it really depends on the market. And these are all for people who are at or below the 60% AMI. And so in some communities, we have units specifically for people who are at 30% of AMI, and that was the case in Buffalo. In Buffalo, we did some closer to market rate as well. We did some 80 and 100% AMI units, and if I'm speaking code, pardon me, but I'm talking about area median income.
Yep.
And I think we're out of time for questions.
I think there's one more. I think you had a question? So one more. It's the last question.
Could you give us an example of the average time that artists would actually reside there? We have a really good art community in the university as well, and I know the students like to have studio space, and I don't think the art building currently has really awesome studio space. So I did a survey a couple years ago that we were asking students about the workspaces, and that was something that they mentioned. They needed showcase space, and so we also have that mobile and transient community coming into this city as well. So.
Sure. Boy, that varies a lot, but we have very high occupancy rates because there's such a demand for this kind of space in these communities if we've done our homework well. When we refinanced our very first project in St. Paul that was created in 1989, and we refinanced it last year, we found that of the original 50 residents, 13 were the same from 1989 to the present, and the rest of them had turned over. But how many times? We didn't track that over time. So there's always some artists who, when they have families or their economic situation changes, may want to move into a single family home. But there are a lot of artists who have raised their families and matured and gone on to sort of be the senior advocates within the arts community, and they stay in those buildings, and they become, we love it that over time they become very multi-generational. Yeah. So thank you, and I think we have to wrap up. So thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
Okay, our next and final presentation in the series is with Steve Davies, Senior Vice President of Project for Public Spaces in New York, who will present Healthy Food Hubs, Eliminating Food Deserts and Supporting Local Economies on March 28. That's a timely topic as it relates to food deserts. Carol Murphy did some work on food deserts along with some other partners in the region. And the University Park area is a food desert. So the presentation is actually sold out, but if you're not already registered, if you registered, you should have a space. If you're not, give us a call, put you on the waiting list, and we'll see if we can slide you in. So any other comments? Otherwise, we'll wrap it up and say thank you very much.